Hey everyone, it's Anthony from Pretty Printed here. In today's video, I want to talk about how to create your own custom commands in Django. So what I mean by commands is like when you run Python manage.py and then something like, start app or run server or create super user or shell or whatever. Those are commands that Django gives you so you can do certain things with your project. But you can create your own commands so you can, do whatever you want depending on like what the command is for. So in this video, I'm going to show you two examples of commands. The first command is going to be very simple. It's just going to basically print out what you put in as arguments. And the second command will add data to the database. So to begin to create your own custom command, you have to create files in a particular location so Django can find them. So inside of one of your apps, I have an app called example. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a directory called management. So make directory, and then inside of example, I'm going to create a directory called management. And then I'm going to create another directory inside of that called commands. So example, and then management commands. Once I have those two things, I can create files inside of this commands directory. And any file that doesn't begin with an underscore will be taken as a command. So what I'll do is I'll create a file called mycommand.py. So what's going to happen is mycommand.py is going to have the code for a single command, and that command is going to be called mycommand. So I'll be able to run it like this. So Python manage.py and then mycommand. And let's see what happens when I do this. I get an error because it says my command has no attribute command. So it's looking for something, but it can't find it, but it is looking in the correct place. So let's open up that file. So mycommand.py. And to create a command, you need to have a class called command, so capital C, and then it needs to inherit from another class called base command. Okay. And to get this command, this base command, I need to import from django.core.management.base, and I'm going to import base command. So once I do this, I have this class that will be interpreted as a command. And there is one required method inside of this class that I need to define, and that's called handle. So I'll define that here. And basically what happens in handle is your action for your command. So whatever you want to do for your command, you're going to put inside of handle. So for handle, you need to pass in self, it's a class, and then arguments and something like options. So I'll get to those in a moment. Well, really arguments don't do anything. So I'll get to options in a moment. But first, what I want to do here is I simply want to print something. So command and then my command. So what happens is when I run this command on the command line, it's going to find the name of the command, which is my command. So it's going to look in the mycommand.py, and then it's going to find the command class and look for the handle method, and it's going to execute whatever inside of handle. So let's try that out. Let me clear this out. So I'm going to run python manage.py, my command, hit enter, and we see command and then my command. And I can change this to anything. I can say, second line, and this will have 2 lines. So all the code inside a handle will get executed for the command. So this already by itself is pretty powerful because as you can imagine, you can say enter data into the database. You just need to import your models or whatever you need, and then create new objects, save them, and they get inserted into the database. So for this first example, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you some of the arguments that you can add and what happens, and also some of the ways that you can style the output. So first, let's talk about the arguments. So to define arguments for a command, there's another method that you need to have, and it's called add arguments. And this is going to take in self and something called parser. So this parser is an object of the parser class from argparse. So this is a built-in Python library. I'll put the docs in the description below if you want to take a look, but I'll cover some of the common options that you will use when you create arguments for your command. So to add a particular argument to your command, you're going to use the parser. So this is passed in, and you're going to call the method called add arguments. So singular. So add arguments as the method in command is going to be plural, and then parser.addArgument is going to be singular. And then you can have 2 types of arguments. It can be either a positional argument or an optional argument. So positional arguments just have a name to them. So nothing special. So I'll say, first as a positional argument. And then optional arguments, they're going to start with a dash. So it can be one dash, it can be two, it can be really however many you want. But by convention, you only use one or two. You use one dash with like a single character that follows, or use two dashes with like a name. So I'll use two dashes in my case. So option one is what I'll call it. So once you define the arguments that are available, then there are some things that you can do. So first, you can get the value of these pretty easily. So here in the handle, to get the value of an option, you type, I'm going to use print. So print an F string, and I'll say first and then a colon. And then I'm going to take this options. So it's a dictionary, options, and then I'll pass in the name of the option. So it's first. So the name here. And I'm just going to print that, right? So I expect to see whatever value I pass in for first, and I'll show you how to pass that in. And for the other one, I'm going to pass in second, or actually, no, I'll just say option one to keep it consistent with the name. And this is going to be options. And even though I'm using a dash for the name here, so two dashes, you don't need the dashes when you're referencing the name inside the options dictionary. So it's just going to be option one without the dashes. And then I just put the closing curly bracket. And now to run this, I'm going to pass in something for first and something for option one. So my command, first of all, I can't just run this anymore. It's going to tell me that I have something that's required. So first, so what I need to do is I need to pass in something for first. And to do that, because it's a positional argument, I just need to pass in a value. So I'm going to say, first value with quotes because I have a space in there. And I can hit enter. And now we see first down here is first value. So that's what I passed in. If I change it to something else, some other value, then we see some other value down there. And no, you don't need the quotes. That's only if you want to add spaces. So if I want to say something like first, then we see first is first. Now for the optional command, notice that it didn't error out because it's optional. So I can do -- option one, and then I can pass in a value. I can either use the equal sign or I can just pass it, with a space. I'll just use a space for these examples. And for option one, I'll say something, right? And now we see down here, we have option one, something, and first is first, okay? So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna build out like a more complicated example, still using this one, and just to show you some of the things that you can do. So I'll leave first and option one as the names, but what I'll do is I'll specify what they're for. So first, I want it to be an integer, so I can't pass in a string. So you can pass in type, and for this, since I want it to be an integer, I can pass in int. Then I can also pass in a help value, and I'll do that. And I'll say a number less than 100. And I'll show you where this appears in just a moment, but I'm passing in something for help, so for users of this command, they can see what it's supposed to do. Likewise, for option one, I can have like a default value. So notice when I didn't pass anything for option one before, it was none. So what I can do is I can have a default. So I'll just call this default as well. You can make this anything you want, obviously, but it's just going to be a default. And then I'll say the help is going to be the option one value, right? So now I want to make this run a little bit. So let me comment all these out. I won't be using them in the same way. So now what I want to do is I want to check to see if that first argument, which is supposed to be an integer, is truly less than 100, right? So I can do something like this. If options first is less than 100, so this will be converted to an int automatically, so I can do this comparison. So if I pass in like a string here instead of an integer, it's going to fail before it even gets to this point. So I can say if options first is less than 100, what I can do is I can write something to the output. So I can use print, but it's actually better to use the standard out that you get. So if you call self.standardout, so SDT outs.write, then you can write something. And you can also write with styles. So then you can call like self style, and then you pass in the style. So really there are three that you would use typically. One will be done automatically, which is the one for failures or errors. So I'll use success and warning in my examples. So capital for everything in success. And then in here, I can write some values. I'll say, good job, the number is less than 100, okay? But if it's not less than 100, so it's 100 or greater, I want to have an error. So instead of just writing an error to the standard out, I can use the standard error, which comes automatically when I raise a command error exception. So I can import something called command error. And then here, I can just raise command error and say that number is greater than 100, okay? So let's do this first. So let me clear everything out. So Python manage.py, my command. And remember, the first thing needs to be an integer and the second is optional. So let's enter let's enter a string first. So I'll just say string. And we get an error. We see manage.py, my command error, argument first, invalid int value string. So this has to be a number. So I'll pass in 50. I pass in 50 and I see, good job, the number is less than 100. And note that it is green because I'm using the success here. If I use something like warning, for example, and run that same command, it's yellow. So you can style this however you want. If I don't use anything like that, if I just use self.standardout.write, then it's going to be, white like all the other ones. So I'll change this back to success. And now I'll try passing in a number that's greater than 100. So I'll pass in 120. So then this should be false and it should raise the command error. So let's see what happens. So now we see it's red because I raised a command error and it says that number is greater than 100. So obviously you would have to write, whatever message you want, but it's going to appear down here in red. So let's move on to the option 1. And what I'll do is I'll just simply write it to the output. So I'll say self standard out, I'll write. I won't use a color, and I'll say, the value of dash dash option 1 is, and I'll have an F string or, a value for this. So options and then option 1. So now if I run this, we see I have invalid. This should be double quotes. Double quotes like that. If I run it again, so we see, that number is greater than 100. So it's still failing. So it never gets down here because it's raising an exception. So let me change this back to a number that's less than 100. Run it. And now we see, the good job part in green. And then we see the value of option 1 is default. And the reason why it's default is because I didn't pass in anything and I have set the default to default, right? So if I pass in a value now and I say option 1 and we'll say, just option 1 again. So now we see the value of option 1 is option 1. So pretty simple stuff. Let's try adding another positional argument. So to make this clear when you're reading it, I like to group the positional arguments together and then the optional arguments come after, because the optional arguments, they can really be put in between the positional arguments if it makes sense. I'll put the positional arguments first and then I'll follow them up with the optional arguments. So I'll have a second argument, and for this one, I'll do something different. So for the first argument, we're expecting a single value. How about for the second one, I want to expect 3 values. So we'll see what happens. So to do this, to make it expect 3, I can do in args equals 3. By default, this is 1, but I'm specifying this is going to be 3. And I can also say something like type a stir. That's not really important in this case. And then I can have help again, and I'll say 3 strings. How about this? 3 strings like that. And now what I can do is I can, loop over the values passed in for second, because I'm expecting 3 of them, and I can print them. So I can say something like for value in options, and then second, because if it's greater than 1, then it's going to be a list. Actually, if it's 1, it will be a list of 1. So if you don't supply anything, it's going to be a single value. If you supply 1, it's going to be a list of 1. but there's really no use for having a list of one thing where you can just have it as a single value. But for value and options of second, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write that value. So write f string, and I'll just say something like value and then value like this. And then to run the command, we'll say python manage.py my command. I need to pass in first. So remember, the first positional argument is a number that's less than 100. That's what I'm expecting. And then the second, I can pass in three things. So it's positional. So I can pass in three separate things. So I can say first, second, third. So before I do that, if I just do first, second, it will give me an error because it says, the following arguments are required second, and it's expecting three things, and I only passed in two. So now when I do first, second, third, I see the same. The number is less than 100, and I see first, second, third there. So when I use this in args, it's going to take all the arguments that follow with the correct number of options, and it's going to put them in a list together. And by the way, when you use this, you can pass in like a variable number. You can check this out in the documentation. So instead of having, three that you have to pass in, you can pass in, let's say, one or more options, and it will do it for you. Just need to be careful with that if you have positional arguments that follow, because if you do, then you may confuse the person using your command when they try to go and use it. But for this example, I'll just have like a set number of arguments that you can pass. And finally, I'll have one more optional argument. And this optional argument will be different. So add arguments, and we'll say like option 2. And instead of expecting a value for option 2, it's just going to be a flag. And to make this work, I'm going to call action, and I'll say store true. So what this means is the action for this particular flag, this particular argument, will store a true value for option 2 instead of storing like a value that the user passes in. So I can say something like, true if passed, right? Nothing really amazing. And then I can do this down here. I can say if options, and then remember option 2. This is going to be either true or false because I'm using that store true. So I can say standard out, right, the option, I'll make this success. So style, success, option 2 is true. And then if this is false, then I can do standard out, right, self, style, warning. So option 2 is false. Okay. So what happens if I pass in the second option, it will be true. And if I don't pass in anything, it becomes false. So let's try that here. So remember, I still need the integer, and then I need 3 arguments. And then first I'll pass in option 2, right? And we see option 2 is true. Value of option 1 is still default. I'm not passing anything in for that. And then if I don't pass in option 2, then we get yellow. Option 2 is false. So that's really the basics of it. If I add a help here as an attribute, I can have a string for what this means. So the help information for this command. And now what happens when I do this, I can say python manage.py my command, and I can do -- help. And I can see, all the information. So for example, we see first a number less than 100 because that's what I put for help. Second, 3 strings. And then it has the options that are added automatically. So you can do things like, settings, Python path, and so on. We see option 1 and option 2. I see the option 1 value. I see true of pass. And then I'm looking for the help information for this command. Let's see, where is that? And I don't see it. Oh, I put it in the wrong spot. So this help isn't part of handle. It's an attribute of the actual class. So let me move this out and put it up here. This makes more sense. So the help information for this command, and then when I run my command -help, I should see that somewhere. Yeah, so the help information for this command. So you can write as much as you want to explain to the user how this thing works. So that's the simple example. So now what I want to do is an example of just adding something to the database. So what I'll do is I'll create another command. And before I do that, I have, models, and I have a model called member. It just has like a name, a region, and a moderator. So I'll show you how all those work, and then I'll go to the admin dashboard to see this being added for me. So I'm going to create a new command. So touch example management commands, and I'll create a file called member.py. So the command is going to be member, and I'll open up that member. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to import that base command. So from Django core management base, import base command. And then I'm also going to import the model. So from example.models import member. I have to create the class called command. It needs to inherit from base command. And then I need to define, add arguments, which takes in a self and the parser. And then I'll define handle as well, which actually runs it. It needs to be arguments and options, just like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have arguments for so where is it? I need to open my models again. I'm going to have arguments for name, region, and moderator. So the first argument will be parser add argument name. And by the way, what I didn't mention is the positional arguments appear in the order that you add them. So this is going to be the first one. Then I can add another one. So parser add argument, have this be region. And since the region is limited to some choices, so it can either be North America or EU, what I can do is I can specify that. So choices equals NA or EU. And if I don't add either one of those, then it will fail and it will tell me why it's failing. Then finally, I'll add an optional argument. So parser, this should be parser dot add argument. I'm going to have -- moderator. And the action will be, store true. All right. And then for the handle, what I'll do is I'll create a new member. So member, and then name is going to be options of name. And then I have a region. So let me put these on multiple lines. So region is going to be options region. And finally, the moderator depends on, if this is true or false. So we'll say moderator equals options moderator. Because remember, if I pass in this moderator flag, then it's going to be true. If I don't pass in anything, it's going to be false. So I can just pass it directly to here because this will be either true or false. Then I can do member.save, and then I can print a success message. I can say self.standardout.write, and then self.style.success, added member. So this won't have any error checking or anything like that. Just really simple so you can see this working. So I think that's everything that I need for this member. So let's try it out. So Python manage.py and then member. First argument is going to be a name. So let's say Anthony. Second argument's a region, NA. And the third argument is moderator. So moderator like that. Run it. We see added member. So I can add another one and I can say, Brian is going to be in the EU, and then Brian won't be a moderator. So I'll take away moderator. We see added member. So if I do Python manage.py run server, I'm going to look in my admin dashboard, go to members, and we see I have Anthony and Brian. So for Anthony, the region is North America. Anthony is a moderator. And then for Brian, Brian is in Europe, but Brian is not a moderator. So that's all I want to show you for running commands. There is a little bit more if you want to learn about it. I'll post a link in the description below to the documentation for commands in Django, but this is pretty much the process. And whatever you can imagine for a command, you can create here. And commands are great if you want to do them on the command line. They're also great if you want to have like some kind of automated process come and run a command every so often as a job or something. It's great to use commands in that way as well. And the nice thing about commands is they automatically import all the settings from your Django app, so you don't have to worry about that. You can just use the code that you want even outside of the web app context. So that's it for this video. Make sure if you haven't joined my Django Database Essentials course, it's a free course that I have on different things that you could do with the database in Django. So for example, if you want to learn how to chain filters, then inside of your command, you can chain a bunch of filters in your command. So make sure you check that out. I'll put the link in the description below, or you can just go to prettyprinted.com/Django SQL and you can, or Django database, excuse me, and you can view this course and join it. So if you have any questions about what I've done in this video, feel free to leave a comment down below. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please subscribe. So thank you for watching, and I will talk to you next time.